Ceasefire, Episode 2, Destroying the Divide. You're here with Andrew and Lucas, and we are so stoked that you're tuning in and listening to us today. We are going to be talking about, in Episode 2, Why Are We So Divided? Title of the episode. Very big piece of subject matter, but a very important one, and this will sort of lay the foundation for where we're going together, really throughout the life of the podcast. Lucas, how you doing today, my man? Thankful that you're here with us.
I'm good. I'm glad you chose this because I was like, what are we going to do for the second episode? But I do think, given the name, right, Ceasefire, subtext, Destroying the Divide, I think it's good to kind of talk about what exactly is the divide and what do we think is causing it? Because I think there's multiple factors at play. And I also think just the flow of the show as we do the flyover and then we go into the trenches and the debrief. I think that'll enable us to handle in a sort of an emergent way. Like, okay, let's talk about a big picture and then maybe dive a little bit deeper on how we think about this from our own personal perspective. So I was really glad you chose this because I was actually thinking, I was like, what are we going to talk about for the next episode? Because I think we're going to start to get into current events and things going on. But I think laying groundwork is a really good idea.
Most definitely. And before we get too deep into the episode, as Lucas just mentioned, we have 3 segments to every episode. And if you like what you hear on the flyover, which is the piece of content that you're currently listening to, it's the free format, the first 30 minutes plus of the episode. We do 2 more episodes, the first of which is called The Trenches, and the final segment is called The Debrief. And we really go a lot deeper in both of those pieces of content. And we do attack the episode material in very distinct and different ways. The Trenches is the deeper look at the content. The Debrief is us being basically taking the gloves off and being candid in our analysis of one another's thoughts on the episode or our conversation with a guest. If you like what you hear, you can subscribe, and for more information, please see the show description / tier descriptions on our homepage for the respective platform in question. Lucas, you ready to do this?
Yes, I am.
So this is such a big topic and a big question. Why are we so divided? And few could argue that the division in culture has ever been as charged, at least in recent history of living generations, as it is at this moment. And it's been really building and building and building. But before we go deeper into answering the question, I wanted to first ask you, man, how was your week?
It was good. You know what's funny is in the gaming world, we had one of the most divisive discussions I've ever had about a game it's a remake, and everybody was really angry and thought it didn't look good enough, and they thought it was just a remaster, which, if you're not a gamer, you're like, why would anybody care about the differences between those two words? They sound synonymous. They're not synonyms, and they're very distinct and very different. But man, oh man, it was divisive. It was crazy. It was a great episode. People really responded well because it was a fiery debate. But it's funny how even this divide, it's affecting other framings and other discussions and other debates, even into something that you might think is a little more superfluous to like daily life, gaming, right? A video game. But I have really found that, number one, I think that makes for great content and great discussions, but everything can become one side. You have to pick a side. I had people telling me that they thought I was like a corporate shill because I was defending the product. I thought it looked good. I thought it was, it was worth the money. So it was an awesome week. Like, we've really been enjoying the turn that we're experiencing with our content and our channels. But it's also leading to some of those moments where I'm like, wow, there are people who are way, way out in left field on this. And the cool thing was, at the end of the episode, I had people who had been just knocked down, hammer and tongs, drag out, fighting with me the whole time. They stuck around for the rest of our episodes, rest of our content. I only had to bounce 2 people. They were just kind of being nasty and name-calling. And that's just, it's not conducive to discussion, And I told people, I said, I have a lot of respect for somebody I tell them they have a chin. I'm like, you have a chin, because I take swings. I come at people pretty hard when I'm debating. I'm like, I use the boxing metaphor. I'm like, you have a chin, you have a jaw, man. You can take it. You can get in the ring and spar. And I love having community members that are like that. They're durable. They can take the hits. They can debate. They can discuss. And man, I hope we can get some guests on the show like that, because I really think we can start to show people like we don't need to be so divided, you know. And so how my week was, serendipitously, it was a pretty divisive week leading up to this episode, but we were able to enjoy it, I think, when we discussed all those things.
And you really hinted at something that needs to be stated, and I think it's the reason why we are here, and that is it's impossible to hide and bury your head in the sand anymore from the polarization. No matter what sphere of life, commerce, culture you are in, you are smacked in the face by divisiveness. And it is becoming such an issue in our world that, well, it bears discussing for sure, you know, and we're going to attack it from every angle again throughout our journey here, not just today, but together with hopefully a building community of people that are willing to get in the dirt with one another and talk about difficult subjects and do it in such a way so we're not spewing hatred at one another, but rather trying to sharpen one another and grow, which is the whole point of living in a free society. if I can get an amen on that. But
yeah,
really what I want to look at today and what we want to look at together is trying to deconstruct or dissect how we got here a little bit. And we're going to do that in the big picture sense in this initial segment together. And in my research and in my thought process going into this episode, I came across so much good content, so many good quotes, so much great data, and I'm sure you did as well, that it was almost impossible to pare it all down. And that was the most difficult part of doing research for this, is what to focus on. And I think because we're doing the flyover here, we really need to look at the big picture of culture, the stream of culture, and not get too distracted or rabbit holed into one aspect of the discussion. You know, we could very easily fill an entire episode with just race or politics or identity or gender or all of these things, but they're all sort of symptoms of a larger disease, so to speak. So I would submit, if I could get the ball rolling here, I want to throw out a few ideas, and then I would love to hear you spitball. If you had to give a synopsis of the problem here and articulate the big picture of what the problem is and how we got here. If I had to do that, which I have to do in these next few moments, I would say that we're living in an era that's unprecedented in human history, and civilization itself is becoming higher stakes. Things are consolidating before our very eyes in ways that we've never seen before as human beings. We use the term, and we throw the term around, globalization constantly in discussions, but we don't really ponder what that actually means. When we talk about global interests, we're talking about, you know, agendas that are outside of the United States basically being forced upon us. But the reality is, as my phone screen goes black here, I struggle with having all the proper settings on my phone at all times, and the one that I struggle with the most is the how long should the sleep timer be? I'm always adjusting that at every moment. You know, when should that kick in and save my battery versus when it gets annoying that I want to keep something open and it doesn't stay open. Sidebar, but talking about globalization, and globalization is nothing more than power structures consolidating and becoming more centralized, getting outside of the thought of strictly speaking in terms of the United States. We're really seeing a government, a one world order or one world government, so to speak, or one world control structure sort of materialize before our very eyes. And we live in the part of the world that is one of the only remaining major parts of the world that is opposed to this. And it's not even our entire country that's opposed to it. It's a segment of our country. But as we see consolidation of power, we're seeing stakes being raised. And so every time there's a political cycle in our nation, we're seeing there being more to gain and lose by remaining or assimilating or winning the power battle. So therefore, structures and systems in our country are becoming increasingly corrupt over time. And the trickle-down effects of all of that is what is creating a culture of fear, because fear sells. Fear mobilizes. Fear creates action steps. And so when you boil down everything that's happening in the world, we're seeing what is emerging is a culture of fear that is then being transacted into communication patterns that affect every single one of us in every part of life. And the more that fear is inflamed, I have some notes here on my phone that I'm referencing, the more you see people afraid of those that don't agree with their point of view. And so this feeds into tribalism. I don't know if you would disagree with any of this, but I'm trying to give a big picture here of what I see going on. If there's an answer to all of this, or if there is an overriding why to it all, in my opinion, and we're talking about America here, it's from a Washington Times article, an answer that was given that I thought was a good summary of the situation. This was an article that was written in 2021 by a guy named Everett Piper. And he said, the problem isn't that progressives disagree with conservatives, Republicans with Democrats, or independents with libertarians. No, political differences are not the cause of the disease. In fact, debating differing opinions isn't the issue at all. As an educator, this is what he says, I've always believed that the give and take of a good argument is actually healthy. And that's what we believe, you and I, in starting this endeavor, this podcast, this show. The disease plaguing our culture isn't disagreement, but rather it is that we have completely abandoned any objective standard for deciding how to arbitrate our differences. The problem isn't that we disagree, but rather that our nation no longer has any rational or peaceful way of deciding who's right and who's wrong. The problem is that we have abandoned truth, which is the why, at least in my opinion. Since the founding of America, the unalienable rights that form the building blocks of our society have found their source in God's revealed truth, not the government. And this is from a moderate voice here that I'm quoting. The rejection of this fact, of this truth, goes hand in glove with our country's consequent loss of cultural unity and cohesion. We dare not forget that John Adams once famously warned, our Constitution is made for a moral and religious people and is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. Here is the problem. In other words, to live together in peace, Adams, as well as others who fought for and gave us the freedoms we now enjoy, believe that we must have a binding glue that comes from somewhere other than ourselves, from something bigger, better, and wiser than you or me. To claim otherwise is pure arrogance, chronological snobbery, to be more precise. It is akin to pretending that all reality can be explained from within the test tube of ourselves. I'm almost finished. This is a creed of mere mortals who think they know more than the giants who have gone before them. Our new national religion is one of feelings over facts. It is a church of the created over the creator, the self over the savior, and our power over God's enduring principles. And so, not to get too preachy, but this again is a moderate voice expressing the facts of the situation. We have gotten away from the things that have made our belief system, our belief structure in America, what it is, basically. And this is my theory. I would love to hear yours, though, my friend. So please tell me where you're coming from. Why are we so divided?
Yeah, there's a lot there. I think I would use two words to summarize a lot of what you said that I think surmises sort of my position. One's authority and one's identity. So I think it's sort of burning the candle at both ends, because as you erode authority, which is what are the rules? If we're going to have a debate, a discussion, if we're going to decide what is true, what authority are we appealing to? What's your philosophy of truth? Does truth even exist? In the one Indiana Jones movie, he famously and sort of comedically quips, he's talking about facts. He's like, if you want to talk about truth, go down the hall and talk to the philosophy professor. Like, he's almost creating a divide as if facts aren't truth, they're simply facts. But underneath that belief is a philosophy of truth, this idea that truth exists. This is a true thing. This is objectively true. And the erosion of that, if you look at, sort of modern to postmodern thought, the moral relativism that started to erode at the idea of you can't have an absolute truth. There's only my truth, which is hugely popular now. And it's just completely and utterly bankrupt of anything that's intellectually sound or even durable for basic life. Like, if you look at how therapy works and how healing works when someone has to get through something, the antidote is usually truth, delivered in a very good and loving way. But if someone is fearful and overly anxious and it's disrupting their life, truth is the antidote to that. They have to see that their fear is not founded in reality. It's exaggerated. It's not rooted in things that are real or based on things that are real. So that's one side of the candle that's just getting eroded back. There is no authority now. What are you going to appeal to say whether or not a person is right or wrong on a given subject? And even when you have a debate and discussion, there has to be an undercurrent of truth about. There's almost like unspoken rules. I think C.S. Lewis talked about that, how if somebody cuts in line and everybody takes an issue with it, the person starts to defend themselves because they know there's almost these rules outside of us sort of dictating right and wrong, what you can and can't do. And so once you erode that, the other side of the candle that's getting eroded is identity is no longer rooted in things that are about others. So like my dad's generation, I was reading a book on work, and it talked about how the older generation, work was about a sense of duty, providing for your family, being a good citizen, paying your taxes, whatever. And the shift he saw was that the next generation wanted work to be something that was meaningful. It was about self-fulfillment. So that's now an inward self-focused identity instead of an other-focused identity. I need to provide for my family. I need to be a good citizen. We're even seeing that self-fulfillment movement is sort of a jettison out from the nuclear family, putting down roots. They don't want that. They want to have that freedom. And I think when that identity starts to get eroded against, what you have is now, from both sides, you have people that are so worried about self-fulfillment and their freedom and what they want to do, and it's infected with this idea of their truth, that it would be like trying to play a game of soccer and everyone is wearing different equipment. Somebody's wearing, NFL equipment and a helmet, and this guy's wearing hockey pads, and you got a football and you got a baseball and somebody's got a bat. Nobody's playing according to the same rules, so it's chaos. You would never have a functioning game of soccer if you did that. So if you zoom out and you look at society in that way, it's chaos. It's everybody sort of playing according to completely different rules of like what is truth, what's right, what's wrong. And fundamentally, the quote that you read, it sounds scary to people. It's like, oh my gosh, is this somebody that thinks we're a Christian nation? It's like, well, no. But the fundamental principles that sort of founded the nation was the idea that truth exists. Like, a philosophy of truth is almost inherently religious because you're saying something supernatural. You're not saying something that is found in nature. You're saying there's something sort of above nature. There is a truth. There is a reality. There is a meta-reality that's above everything, which is...
In God we trust.
Right. And so... But we also have to remember, it's not a Christian nation, right? Like, these were separatists running away from a state church. They don't want that. They don't want it to be viewed in that way. But there's that undercurrent of, if we're going to debate, if we're going to have policy, if we're going to have laws, if we're going to be citizens together, there is a foundational authority underneath. And there's also an identity that's more other-focused than self-focused. And I don't know. He says it in Fight Club. We're the middle child of history. We have no wars to fight. The wars that we're fighting are for our lives. Like, people are fighting for an identity. Peterson and these guys called it a meaning crisis. I continue to think it's an identity crisis. The reason that somebody feels threatened when you disagree with their political position is because they've integrated their position into their identity. So if it crumbles, if it's seen as faulty or wrong, they crumble with it. And one of the stats I found that's right in line with this, according to a YouGov survey, 60% of Democrats regard the opposing party as a serious threat to the United States. For Republicans, it's about 70%. So a majority of both sides views the opposing side as a threat to the country. That's why, because of it's so integrated into their identity that the opposing side, it's a threat to them and their life.
You're not wrong. And where my mind goes, and you said a lot there, there's so much. Where my mind naturally goes as we get into this discussion is, who is benefiting from this? Or is this just the result of an accident of culture and civilization and converging circles that happen to be a perfect storm of death for us all, that you kept using the word chaos? I think that's a great word. Or has this been orchestrated in some form? Is there someone, you get into conspiracy theory, and that's always a word that's used to discredit anyone who presents an idea that's outside of the current narrative or the current accepted mainstream school of thought or ideas, right? But you get into the realm of conspiracy. Is there a reason why this is happening? Is there someone or something or a small group of people that are outside of our ability to touch that are influencing all of this, or that are reaping benefit from it? And perhaps that's too big of a question to confront in one episode, or even especially one episode segment. But it's something that I feel is important to address throughout the life, again, of this show. Is there, one, a reason why we're divided? And two, is that reason benefiting someone or something in some way? And there are multitudes of theories out there on this. But I would suggest, or at least put out the idea, that it is possible that all of that we are seeing in the world right now is not an accident. It's not simply the result of forces coming together that are arbitrary. There may very well be control behind the scenes, puppeteers, if you will, who are pulling the strings of culture to make certain things happen. And there's a lot to explore when it comes to it. I wanted to throw out just another great quote that I found. This is a nonpartisan journalist named Ryan Christian. He actually won an award for journalistic integrity. And he wrote an article about the corruption in America. He said this: when a system of power is corrupt, it usually has two main objectives: to keep the current system of power in place as long as possible, and to expand this system of power for the sole benefit of those who own and operate it. To bring about this agenda without the public catching onto it, those in power cannot allow the masses to identify where the roots of corruption are stemming from, while also employing deceptive tactics to covertly expand its influence in the shadows. One strategy stands alone as the most effective go-to tool for the powers that be when it comes to keeping/expanding power. Some refer to it as the Hegelian or the Hegelian dialectic. Others refer to it as problem reaction solution. Here it will simply be referred to as divide and conquer, the oldest trick in the authoritarian manifesto. And this is what I'd like to talk to you about a little bit more as we get deeper into the trenches and beyond, is the possibility, we've identified that there is a problem and everybody feels it. How we respond to that problem is dictated by our understanding of why the problem exists and perhaps who it benefits. My thought process here is the more we look at this, the more we'll be pulling at the threads on the proverbial sweater, so to speak, and delving into some very interesting discussions. But what are your thoughts here on this, my man? Is there anyone benefiting from this? Is there any part of you that feels like perhaps, just perhaps, not into the realm of fact, just into the realm of hypothesis even, that there's orchestration to some of this?
There is 100%. There are interested parties, people, organizations that are benefiting. I would say, from everything I've kind of looked at, it's more correlation than causation. However, it's, to me, if you zoom out on it, it's almost as if emergent properties took place. And emergent properties are essentially when there's complex systems and there's unintended sort of offshoots and consequences that come from those. So this typically is something that's observed in nature, like emergent properties that sort of benefit certain plants or animals that come from like complex ecosystems. Suddenly, that really cool video where the apex predator came back to I think it was Yellowstone Park. It was wolves migrated back in, and it changed the shape of the river because there was less deer, and the deer were over-consuming grass close to the water, which weakened the soil, which changed the shape of the river. So the apex predator returning to the ecosystem, an emergent property from that was the river changed shape, right? Wolves didn't come back in and say, all right, guys, we're going to change the shape of the river, right? So I think if you look at our political systems, there have been emergent properties, unintended things that have sort of come out of everything that's happening, but that doesn't mean there aren't opportunists who poured gas on the fire and said, hey, we can really sort of entrench both sides. And there's a book called Why We're Polarized by Ezra Klein, and he says, once a political party has decided the path to governing is retaking the majority instead of working with the existing majority, the incentives transform. Okay, so that's an emergent property. They're deciding we don't want to work with the majority, we want to overtake the majority. So that transforms the incentives for the politicians. Now it's a completely different game. The rules have changed. So instead of cultivating a good relationship with your colleagues across the aisle, you need to destroy them because you need to convince the voters to destroy them too. So does that mean somewhere, someplace, there were politicians that said, we're going to change the landscape, we're going to change the game? Or was it an emergent property and it became really effective? It's super effective to run for office or to get reelected if you run on, as you've said, fear. If you get people to be scared, I made an update on my Facebook in 2016, and I said it was very telling that our political landscape had turned into vote for me because I'm not as bad as the person over there, instead of running on their own merits. They were. It was so transparent to me. It was so see-through. It's like, and I said, if we always are voting for the lesser of two evils, we will eventually be left with nothing but evil, because we're going to let the fox into the hen house, because we're going to continue to think, well, we might as well vote for this person because they're not as bad as that person. And then you end up with a corrupt system. So the system being corrupt and the people that we're voting for seemingly not being true statesmen anymore. They're far more corporate driven. They're driven by lobbyists. That feels more like emergent properties of a complex system that have been escalated and amplified and increased by opportunists. So it's both and. I think you're correct. I think there are people that benefit, but I don't know if they orchestrated it. I think they capitalized on it. I think there's a big difference, because once you start going down conspiracy theory, you start thinking there's some like one world government forming. There's these people, there's these, they're puppeteering everything. Occam's razor makes that really difficult because you have too many pieces that have to be working together. You have too many explanatory things to come to that conclusion. So Occam's razor would say no. It's probably more likely that these were emergent properties that corporations and politicians are capitalizing on, which is sinister in its own way, but it's not as sinister as there's some secret organization doing all of this. So that's my take on it, is because I know people start to see smoke here and think there's fire. They're like, oh, there's it's the Illuminati, right? It's some super wealthy organization orchestrating everything that's happening in the world. Probably not, in my mind. Probably not. But it's still pretty busted, and it's not benefiting the general populace. It's benefiting the wealthy. It's benefiting corporations and politicians.
I would say the inflaming of fear has become a tactic, as you said, that is very effective, and the media has become so adept at this. Now, when you think of the media, you think of the major networks, but you also have to consider social media as well, because the majority of people now get their information from alternate sources, quote unquote, not just CBS or NBC and the like, but to focus just on the mainstream media companies, they're all competing with one another for eyes, and it's become increasingly competitive. Same with the political landscape. It's become increasingly competitive. The stakes have gotten higher. And when I suggested the one world government and the trend in that direction, there are signs, there are markers, but you said it best when you noted that there are so many variables. It's very difficult for an extremely small number of people or one group to control everything, right?
Yep.
But smaller numbers of people are being more influential, the billionaires, right? And there's a growing gap between the everyman and the billionaire. The elites are becoming more elite, and the middle structure of society is disintegrating at the hands of those elites. We're not there yet, but it's trending in that direction. Going back to the fear discussion, when you look at increased competition is a given. The further we go in history, the more that's a fact. And we can throw out data, but it's just true. The more people there are in an ecosystem or in a culture, the more competitive the culture becomes. And so there are more and more people on the planet. And I mean, you see this, pick a city, pick a suburb. More people move into it, more businesses, more people competing for everything, resources and attention and the like. So you apply this to the media. Social media comes onto the scene, so many years ago, and now people are getting their information from other sources than CBS and NBC and ABC. And now CBS and ABC and your producers and the like have to get more cutthroat about the content and about the stories they choose. It has to get more charged. It has to, the players get more sleazy. They get more, if one guy's willing to do this, cover this subject in this way and show this level of violence or this level of sexuality or this level whatever, then the other guys have to too. Going right back to the thing you mentioned about changing the game. Right? And so the game keeps getting changed in every facet of culture, and the ante keeps going higher. And the people sitting in the crosshairs are the consumers. Everybody's competing for everybody else's data and attention and eyes, and it's all being harvested and it's all being used, and it's just, how do we sit and stand inside of it? Well, one idea I would throw out is division ain't going to help us. It's not going to help us to hate our neighbor if they disagree with us. Because at the end of the day, we're all in the crosshairs of what's coming down the pipe, whether it's accidental, whether it's a combination of happenstance and intentionality by the hands of those in charge. We can debate that, but one thing we can't debate is it's not going to work to anyone's advantage to hate his neighbor, even if his neighbor disagrees. And I think we're in agreement on that. Closing thoughts on this segment, Lucas, before we go deeper into the trenches.
Yeah, I think the trajectory for the trenches should be getting underneath of this and confronting it. How do we do that, especially as Christians? Because so many of the people that are being divisive are people that would say they align with our fundamental beliefs, and yet they're in the game. They're taking the cheap shots. They're being divisive. How do we confront that? Because I do think you have to confront your own tribe if this is ever going to stop. Like if you imagine a movie, you know, where two tribes are coming together and they're trying to have a treaty, there's always the cliche tropes and the stereotypes in those movies, right? There's the arrogant guy from both sides. There's the hothead who's continuing to throw barbs and make it tense. The only way that stops is each chief needs to turn around and confront that, or this will never work. So how do we confront the failings of, I think, Christians in America in this particular discussion? How do we do that? I think we can discuss that in the trenches. I think that'll be a good launching pad to keep this discussion going.
Most definitely. And the image that came to my mind, Planet of the Apes. I don't know if you're a fan of the more recent trilogy of the Planet of the Apes. One of my favorite pieces of media that's come across my vision in a very long time. And I think of, as you're talking about the guy who's inflaming the situation, I think of Koba, who ultimately was the adversary to Caesar, who's the hero of the story, right? And he initially, Koba is the voice of apes first, right? But eventually he becomes the villain of the story, not the human beings who are warring with the apes, but the internal antagonist.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a great word, the antagonist. Really, that's what needs to be confronted in each of us, the internal antagonist, right? And that's what we're going to be doing here in the trenches coming up. We solicit your support for the show, and we thank you for listening. If you'd like to hear more, you'd like to join us in the trenches, you'd like to be a part of the debrief, please consider subscribing. We adhere to a hybrid model with this show. It's both a subscription model and a value for value model. If you desire to support the show and you're getting something of value of our discussion, with our discussion, from our discussion, we encourage you to consider supporting the show financially. We take time out of our schedules, busy schedules, both of us, to confront the issues that we deem the most important here for not just ourselves, but hopefully the greater community, not just in America, not just among those who would agree with our worldview, but the greater world at large. So please consider supporting. Join us in the trenches. Join us in the debrief. For Lucas, I'm Andrew. This is the Ceasefire, episode 2.